Hi, everyone. Welcome to my podcast. So, before we do get into this episode, I do want to give a quick trigger warning. If you are someone who is sensitive to the topic of abuse, I recommend you do not continue listening to this episode just because we will be touching on some very sensitive topics today. So, we're going to be talking about domestic abuse and the stigma surrounding divorce. So, here I have Annessa with me. She is so kind enough to share her story with us today, and I'm honestly so pleased to have her on my podcast. So, firstly, I do want to say that I have truly been looking forward to this conversation because, Anessa, you are a part of changing toxic generational cycles. And thank you so much for bringing awareness onto things that have been overlooked for years. And I'm truly looking forward to asking you some questions today and hearing your story. But before we do get into that, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. This is a topic that I feel really comfortable talking about just because it's been a long time. And I'm definitely in a place in my life where I feel like I can talk about it. But currently, I am living in Texas. I am a nurse here. I'm in a master's of nursing program to hopefully get my psych nurse practitioner's license. And I love my job. I live near my sister and her husband and my niece and my nephew who I love to death. And my parents actually live in North Dakota, which is where I'm originally from. And I was actually born in Bangladesh, so I'm Bengali. So I know a lot about the South Asian community and whatnot. And I love to paint and just go out hiking in Austin, Texas in my spare time. I know with COVID, it's been hard to go out, but I'm hoping that's going to come to an end soon. We can all resume our lives. But yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And also, I do want everyone here to go check you out on Instagram and TikTok. Or if you have any other socials that you want to plug in, please let us know. How can we find you?
Yeah, so my Instagram and TikTok handle are OVO underscore NESA. So that's OVO Nessa. Um, that's the best way to find me. And then you can also find my YouTube through my links on in TikTok and Instagram as well. But I'm mostly prominent on Instagram and TikTok.
So please make sure you guys go check her out and give her a follow. She's awesome. I have actually taken a look at some of your content and I love it. Actually, after going through your TikTok, before you even told me, I figured out that you were Bengali, which is awesome because I'm actually Bengali too. So I know a lot about how our community can be. And I also know that in Bengali culture, the idea of marriage is very prominent. So usually marriage is pushed upon from a young age. And this actually brings me to my first question is, were you pressured into getting married or was it your decision?
So yeah, this is definitely a topic that it's so big. It starts with us Bengali girls and us South Asian girls at a really young age. So I know like when I was 18 or 19, we were introduced to the idea, and we were also like in our early 20s. We're introduced to like proposals that we would get. It sounds kind of crazy, but we do get like marriage proposals from a lot of random people, a lot of aunties and whatnot. And I've definitely noticed that. And I felt like, okay, my time is coming. I should get married soon. My mom got married when she was 16. My grandma got married when she was 8. My sister got married when she was 24. So, like, I knew that it was something that was probably going to happen early on. And I didn't really know myself enough to decide if I wanted to get married, like, later. Because I just felt like getting married early was the right thing to do. There was never really any pressure, but it was just the way everything was headed towards. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, so I just feel like this is something that is just so huge in the Bengali community. And although I didn't feel like necessarily pressured, I just knew that that's where it was headed towards.
When you did get married, how long into it did you start noticing red flags, or did you notice red flags before the marriage? What was that like?
Yeah, so I definitely started noticing red flags before I even got married, which is really not surprising because that happens to a lot of people, especially our generation. I feel like we tend to want to know who we're marrying before we do get married. But then in our culture, this has nothing really to do with Islam, because Islam you should get to know who you're marrying before you do get married, and it should be a mutual thing. But in our culture, sometimes it is kind of like rushed into like, oh, we found a good match for you. Let's just get it started. Let's just get it going. So I did not feel like that I knew him to the extent that I should have before I got married, and I definitely knew a lot of I saw a lot of red flags and I saw a lot of things in him that I didn't like. But I also knew that he was Bengali and he was really established, and everybody liked him, and I had this checklist that was checked perfectly, superficially. And I'm like, you know what, like, he's a man of God, he's Bengali, my parents like him, it's going to be fine, it's just going to work out, so that's kind of the reason why I went into it. And I definitely noticed everything before the marriage, but it definitely got a lot worse once we did get the nikah and we did get married.
So, as you were going through this, at the beginning, especially, you must have been suffering through silence, or if not, did you have any support? Or did anyone pick up on the fact that you were a little bit distant or anything like that?
Honestly, nobody knew, because I was scared to have anyone not like him. I was living in this fairy tale and everything just seemed so perfect, and I wanted everyone to be on board. So whenever something happened that wasn't okay, or something that was a little scary, I wouldn't tell anybody, because I felt like I was just going to be alone, and that no one was going to support my happiness, just because there was a few bad things. So, and he also made sure that, hey, don't tell anybody. This is just something, that happens in relationship. Every relationship that has ups and downs, so don't tell anybody. So definitely when things were happening during the engagement or even prior to the engagement, I wouldn't tell anybody about it. I would just stay quiet about it. So that when in the marriage, when the physical abuse started, I felt like I literally couldn't tell anybody, because it was just so out of the blue. It wasn't out of the blue for me, but no one was hearing about this stuff. So I felt like nobody would believe me. I thought nobody would support me. And then when I did initially tell my mother-in-law, she was the first person that I did tell, just because we were living in their house and there was really no way for me to cover up with makeup, with the scars on my face. When I had told her, initially it seemed like she was very supportive, and she was yelling at her son saying, you shouldn't have done this, what's wrong with you, and whatnot. And even my father-in-law, he was really furious, at his son. But he did say something that I will literally never forget. He said to his son, he's like, do you realize if she was white, she would have called the police by now, and you are so lucky that she's Bengali? It did not even occur to me that I could call the police. I had absolutely no idea. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that with how I was raised, and that I'm Bengali, and a lot of us just are supposed to take stuff in marriages. I couldn't even believe that I hadn't even realized that that's something I could do. And then, one thing led to another, and eventually I realized that my in-laws didn't have my back, because they were just telling me to just keep quiet and work through our relationship. They'd never told me, go to the ER, get yourself checked out, or, anything like that to support me. They just told me to keep quiet and that everything was going to be fine. So I was definitely experiencing this alone until I spoke out outside of the family, way into the marriage.
I'm honestly so sorry. I know that opening up about this kind of stuff is so difficult, especially because in our community, divorce is taboo. And although divorce is absolutely nothing to be shameful about, there are people who definitely oppose to that and think it's shameful. And especially in the older generation in our community. Did you ever have to deal with any negativity that was very painful or overwhelming surrounding the stigmas?
I definitely have had to endure a lot of that. And, that's the whole reason why we are scared to get divorced, to talk about it, because of that stigma. And I felt like, though, a lot of the stigma was around the fact that I was ashamed of myself. If you're ashamed of yourself, then you'll think everyone's going to be ashamed of you. And I think it definitely took me about 1 or 2 years to finally realize that it's really not a big deal, at all. A lot of people, especially the Bengalis in America, get divorced. You will not believe the statistics of how many people do actually get divorced, but just keep it under wraps and don't tell anybody. So once I realized that there's nothing to be ashamed of, and that I'm really fine, I'm just like the next girl, it really isn't a big deal. But there was definitely moments where I felt the stigma, the community would always be hush hush about it, or when they would talk to me, they would use code words about it, like "How are you doing?" quotation marks. No one knew how to address it, and I felt like I was just like this like unique, like different person that no one knew how to interact with. And you know how I was saying, like I was getting marriage proposals before. Now when I would get marriage proposals, it would only be with divorced men, which I thought it was just so hilarious, because I'm like, wow, like I'm a divorcee now. Like that's a real thing, and I'm only gonna get rishtas with divorced men. Not that I was ever gonna do that, but I just thought it was just really, really funny how that was my label now. I was a divorcee. I wasn't a nurse. I wasn't educated. I wasn't independent. I was a divorcee. That's it. That's all anyone saw anymore. So I noticed a lot of those things, but like I said, once you stop being ashamed of yourself and realize that this really isn't a big deal, like your life becomes a lot easier. And honestly, I know that this happened and it seems like it's huge, but it's just I just don't attach myself to that anymore. I don't identify with as much, and I don't think it's as much of a big deal as I once did, as soon as it happened.
Yeah, personally for, I my biggest pet peeve is how much stigmas are surrounding the topic of divorce. Like women are, expected to put up with so much shit. And I really do hate that. And I'm so glad that you are the reason why these, like I mentioned before, these toxic generational cycles are changing. And as you mentioned before, you did your research and you really opened yourself up to just your conditioning, which I love. And along with doing your research, how else were you able to cope with that judgment? Like, did you find yourself getting into any hobbies? Just because there are some women who struggle to really get away from that mindset of feeling ashamed. So, do you know any helpful ways that they can distract themselves from that?
Yeah, definitely. So, what I did initially was I was lucky to have like a family that really did support me. They never once told me to go back. So, I did completely rely on my family for a long time. But eventually I did start seeing like a doctor. I did start seeing a therapist. I didn't want to, and I waited a few months before I did. But I just thought, like, now that I think about it, I'm like, oh my God, that was just so stupid. I shouldn't have waited, because I was really suffering, but I was just like, no, like I don't need all this extra stuff. I needed it. I really needed it, even if it was just like antidepressants that they were prescribing me, or anti-anxiety meds. And once I did go to the doctor and the therapist, she was explaining that I was having a lot of PTSD and an anxiety disorder. A lot of it is resolved right now, but in the beginning, it is so important to just ask for some help, because there are a lot of programs out there that'll do free therapy, for at least the first 5 to 10 sessions. So it was just really important that I spoke out about it, and I got all the help that I could get, because the longer you keep the stuff in, the harder it is that you'll get over it. And on top of that, I had the choice of moving back to my hometown or starting new in a new city, where my sister lives in Texas. And I decided that although I didn't know anybody at the time, that I was just going to try to restart my life in a new city. So I got my own apartment, I got a new job, and I worked every day to just move forward. There was times where I felt like I didn't know what was going to happen next, but all I knew is that every day I was just going to keep moving forward and not take any steps back. Eventually, doing that for about a year, I finally I realized I created a new life for myself, in which I could just really be myself as well. So it's all about having new experiences when you're ready, but still taking your time with it. I know I explored a lot of Austin. I live in Austin, Texas. I explored a lot of Austin when I first moved here, and it was nice, like a new place, new experiences. It really does help you move forward, as opposed to if I went back to my hometown and I was seeing the same people again. It would have been really traumatizing.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that, you took that initial jump to healing, because that first jump is always the most difficult, and in the end, you were able to turn your negativity into your power, and that is something that I actually really reinforce on here. And I think there's also this negative stigma surrounding divorce. I'm sorry, not divorce, therapy, which I don't like. Because therapy is a way for you to actually really discover parts of yourself that you may have neglected or not understood before. And it opens you up to so many different, things. And I think that that's amazing that you were able to put yourself in a position where you wanted to heal and you wanted things to be better. Because I myself understand that in our community, people can be very judgmental sometimes and it can get very ugly and hurtful. And dealing with people's judgment doesn't make things any easier when you're already trying to leave a heavy situation. And I'm sure that leaving a toxic, relationship is not easy at all. So this actually does tie into my next question. So how were you able to escape the relationship?
So that's something. This is a question I get so much because I think it definitely is something really important, especially to all the women that are currently in it right now. They want to realize how they did it. Disclaimer: I didn't have children, so and I feel like a lot of women in these situations do have children. So I realize that it can be a lot harder, a lot more difficult to make that choice. But the way I did it was I had actually gotten married in December of 2017. So it had actually only been a month in where he got really physical to the point where I just didn't feel safe in the house. So at that point, even before all that happened, I had actually made plans to go visit my sister in Texas. And my mom was staying with my sister at that time. And when I got married, I moved to California. So I'd already like made a plane ticket to go visit my sister with my ex-husband. We were supposed to go together, and coincidentally, like all the incident and all the trauma actually happened the 2 days before I was actually set to fly to leave to my sister's place. So initially, when all the trauma had happened, my in-laws had my in-laws had convinced me that I shouldn't go back to Texas just because of my face, my black eye, and that I needed to heal. And they kept telling me, "Oh, we just don't want your parents to worry. Like we'll take care of it." Obviously, I realize now how toxic that was. They were just trying to kind of hide the fact that their son had did this, But I was convinced. I'm like, okay, I'll just cancel the ticket. I'll just see them another time. But then once it happened again, within a span of 48 hours, that's when I kind of had decided that, okay, I probably need to go. And I'm not going to tell my in-laws that I'm leaving until like right before I leave. And I had also called my sister the night before I left, just crying on the phone. And I was just sobbing on the phone. I was just telling her I miss her. And she kept saying, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Like, why are you crying?" And I couldn't tell her the reason. I literally couldn't get it out of my mouth. I just felt so ashamed that I was in this situation because I never thought I would be in this situation. And then so one thing led to another, and I was still crying. And then she just kind of went silent for a little bit. And then in Bengali, she said, Gaye had dorse, which means, did he lay his hands on you? And then I just like kept crying even more and more. And then she just lost it. She was she was just like, all right, you know what? You don't even have to answer. You're coming to Texas tomorrow. Like, I don't care what he did or if he did anything, you're coming to Texas because he knew something was wrong. She knew something was wrong. So that kind of gave me the push to go see my sister, regardless of, what my in-laws were saying. So that morning, like an hour before I was leaving, I just packed one bag and I told my in-laws, hey, I'm going to take an Uber to the airport. I really need to see my family. Don't worry, I'll be back in a few days. Like, don't worry at all. Like, I said whatever I needed to say to leave. And my ex-husband actually decided that he was going to come with me. So he actually packed up and took me to the airport, and then we ended up flying to Texas together. And as soon as I go out to Texas, my sister, she brought me home to her place, and she took one look at my face, and my mom took one look at my face, and they kicked him out of the house so quickly, like without any. They're just like, you need to get out of the house, and that was the last time I saw him. And it was that night they took me to the ER, and they got me checked out, and they told me like, you're never going back. I hadn't decided yet if I wanted to go back or not, but my parents and my sister made the decision for me. And then after that, I filed a police report. I got my health checked up, and that's kind of where my journey began without him. Because after that night, I never saw him again until I saw him in court, or I never spoke to him again as well until I spoke to him in court. So a lot of it was just my family being supportive of it.
Wow, I'm so, so glad you had your sister and your family there for you because I'm getting upset right now because it's just horrible, but I'm so glad that you were able to get out of that situation. And I understand that this was truly such a battle in so many different ways because, as you mentioned, you had to go to court for this. And I know that you had a very long, frustrating battle at court as well. So, what pushed you to keep fighting regardless of how many times you may have fell at the start?
What pushed to keep me fighting was that I just wanted to prove myself that I could heal and that this wasn't just going to be the thing that happened to me that destroyed me. You know, I knew what I wanted my life to be, and I remember like when I was looking myself in the mirror the morning after all the violence happened, I was looking at myself, and I couldn't recognize myself. And I remember I kept telling myself, "You are too young for this shit. Like, you are 22 years old. This should not be happening to anyone, and it should not be happening to you. Like, you are 22 years old. This is not how your life ends or begins." I always remember that, and I always remember telling myself that, and I knew that I was going to get out, and I knew that I was still going to become something, even though that this had happened. I could not fathom being that person who constantly got beat by her husband. It happens all the time. I kid you not, it happens all the time. It happens in a lot of Bengali marriages, but a lot of people just brush it off. You know, that is where the generational curse and all that abuse just starts. And I knew that I didn't want to do any of that. And so what kept me going was the fact that I knew that there was a great life for me. You know, I was smart, I was educated. I just knew that there was something more to my life. So that's how I just kept going. And with my family support, eventually I found good friends. With their support, I eventually got into a nursing program. I found amazing friends and a support system there. I knew that I could do it, and I knew that I could keep moving forward.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you stuck through and stood by your values. And you did make sure that justice was served in the end because he did get charged. And I'm sure out of all this, there was a lot of growth and lessons that were taught because our most painful situations come with a lot of lessons. So, what was the most valuable lesson that you learned from the relationship overall?
I think the biggest lesson I learned is that you can really overcome anything in your life. You can overcome anything. And that's something I don't think I'll ever forget, because whenever knowing that I got through this, and I even told myself in the beginning, I'm like, if I can just get through this, if I can just figure how to navigate this situation that has never been heard of. I've never known anyone that's ever experienced it. It's so unheard of, even though it's common, that I had no idea who to turn to, who to talk to. I had nobody, absolutely, and nobody to relate to. I just want you to know that you're pretty much invincible. You know, some people say I'm not strong enough to leave this relationship. No, you are. Like, you really are strong enough to leave it. It's just you're gonna deal with a lot of like discomfort, till you do end up leaving. So that's just it. Like, we are invincible and we can get through it. And if you do fight for yourself, that's the biggest thing that you can do in your life, is to choose yourself over something that's not choosing you properly.
Exactly. And you have proven that things do get better because, now you're working now you're working at your dream job and you're in a healthy relationship and you show people that life has its challenges, but there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm sure people tend to forget that when they do feel stuck or overwhelmed. And for that, what would you advise to someone who is feeling stuck in a toxic or abusive relationship?
What I would tell them is that you just need to keep moving forward. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes, like when you leave that relationship, you're gonna want to go back, and that's normal. But your actions that you make today is what yourself is what you're gonna thank yourself 6 months from now. Just a year from now. Like, the one little change that you make today, and you work on it, it'll just completely drastically change your life. And I want to add in that I am in a healthy relationship now. And the reason why I got there was because I went through that toxic relationship, because I realized that, like, what it really takes for a significant other to really respect you. I was not respected at all, and I thought it was normal. I really did. And once you're in a relationship where a guy respects you, you notice it. I know a lot of women are scared to like be in this cycle of like bad relationship after bad relationship, but I disagree with that, because I feel like once you've been put down like that, you just learn you just learn to see that what is actually good for you, what actually isn't. And one of the main things that I learned about in my relationship now is that he really doesn't care that I was divorced. And I thought that he would. I thought, when I initially told him during the time we were just friends and getting to know each other, when I first told him, I was so nervous. I thought like I was just going to be ostracized, and he wouldn't like me anymore or whatever. He wouldn't be my friend anymore. I just told him, and I was, to my surprise, he just brushed it off. He's like, "Oh, okay, well, I'm so glad you got out of that." And that's it. We just moved on from the conversation. I was shocked. I was shocked because I had made it to be such a big thing in my head when, with the right person, they really won't care. And even now, like, I'll talk about my trauma and I'll be talking about all this stuff on social media and fighting against abuse, and he is so supportive of it. He's like, "You keep telling these other girls like what it can be like, to survive trauma and move forward and have a positive life." So it's very much possible. And know that there are good guys and good people out there for you, and that where you are stuck right now is not where you're going to be stuck forever if you just keep moving forward. And sometimes you won't know where you're headed or where you're going. Just the key is you just don't move back. And I think it's just impossible. I think it's possible for everyone to heal and, have a good life.
That's so sweet. I really am glad that you have found, your boyfriend today. And I'm actually so touched. He seems so sweet. And, overall, I really hope that this not only helps people in toxic relationships, but there are also people who are in toxic household situations that are difficult to get out of. And with all that having said, I did want to ask my last question for you. And I really want to know, if your ex husband were to hear this, what would you say to him?
I would really just want him to know that I do forgive him, and that's it. Like, out of everything that happened, we were really young, when it did happen, and I would do like to think that he has evolved and he has become a better man since. And for his current wife, I hope that it is going amazing and that he's totally changed and whatnot. And so I want to do say that I do forgive him, and that I hope that he's living a good life past, his past mistakes. And, although I'll never like say that it was okay, and I'll never justify why he did it. I just want to know that he's grown, and then this is not something that he still does. I'm hopeful. I don't know how true it may be, but I'm really hopeful. And yeah, I just want him to live a good life.
The fact that you're able to forgive him really shows where your heart's at. And, I really do hope that he is able to hear that message. And hopefully he has reflected on his actions and he does understand the consequences of that, because I do find that that is very important. And, everything that you have shared along with your last message today was so powerful. And I really do hope that your story helps at least one person who's listening to this. And overall, thank you so much for your wisdom, Anessa. Those were all the questions that I actually had for you, but was there anything else that you wanted to add or speak on?
I think those were kind of everything. I'm so glad you had amazing questions, and I felt like I could really share properly my experience. So I really appreciate your questions, your interview skills, and just overall taking the interest in my story and trying to help my message, trying to help spread my message as well.
And thank you for being on my podcast and taking the time out to share your story and answer these questions, because I know that talking about this stuff is very difficult. And I know that through your strength, other people will find strength, and they are, and they're able to leave toxic situations because of you. And you have taught so many people this. And I do want you to remember that. And this is actually for the people listening, but please make sure you guys go follow Anessa on her social media platforms and go show her some love, because she is so awesome. And also make sure to follow me on Spotify as well, and check out my Instagram for more updates at It's Munha, ITSMUNHA. And thank you guys so much for tuning into today's podcast. You will be hearing from me in my next episode.